Well, let's move to the next part of this, which would be project number 4. Project number 4 is something that I've more recently been excited about just because I went through it personally. I've gone through my own with my wife and I, and we've got a great partner that you know as well that is a part of this. But take me through project 4 and what I need to be looking at.
Yeah, so Jim came on, and if your listeners haven't listened to the episode with Jim, I thought that was fantastic. Yeah. I love Jim. Had a couple great conversations with him personally as well. Okay, decide who's in charge. That's project 4. And I put it that way because if people say estate planning, then they think, oh, I'm not that wealthy.
Right.
I'm not that wealthy. But decide who's in charge, that makes sense to us all.
Mm-hmm.
That's what estate planning really is. Like who gets what, when, and why. And then organize that in a few documents that have the right authority so that it makes it easy on everybody. That's estate planning. And in estate planning, task 1 is creating the foundational estate plan. So there are so many different trusts and types of trusts out there that just don't matter to 90-something% of people. Mm-hmm. Like not everybody needs these crazy like charitable remainder trusts and irrevocable trusts. And I say crazy, they're not crazy. I'm just saying like very few people need the complex trusts. Yeah. They just need a foundational estate plan. A foundational estate plan is going to have a trust. It's going to have a will, powers of attorney, healthcare directives, and guardianship. Mm-hmm. Those key documents and instructions need to be in place for just about everybody that is in, like anybody who has a home, your home's going through probate without a trust. Yeah. I mean, there are few exceptions here or there, and I'm not an attorney, so I don't want to speak for every state out there. I know you have a lot of people all over, but the general rule is without a trust, your house is going through probate. And if you have any other real estate, you should have a trust. So let's go through specifically what they do. A trust, and without going too far, a trust is for death and disability. It is an entity that lives beyond you. I like to think of it as a robot that follows your instructions perfectly. And so it can't die. It's a robot. It cannot die. Maybe that is a weird example, but that's how I like to think about it. It can't die, and it's programmed to follow your instructions. Now, the trustee is the person in charge of the robot after you die. And sometimes the trustee will tell it to do things that it shouldn't. So that's where you have to talk to your trustees and make sure they know how the robot is programmed to function, right? But anyway, this thing can own assets. You can say, this trust now owns my home. So if I die, it doesn't actually leave the home without an owner because the trust owns the home. And then the trust instructions just tell who's in charge next of the house. So that's what a trust does. And then there's the will. A will is oftentimes thought of either trust or will, but in most cases, people do both. Okay. And they get a will because there are certain things that you don't put in the trust that it's just easier to have it pour over into the trust. So oftentimes they call it a pour over will. Mm-hmm. It just pours over into the trust upon your passing. The will also contains things like, how do I want to be buried? What kind of funeral arrangements do I care about? Like what are my wishes for very specific sentimental items that you can outline that maybe aren't just great to throw into the trust if it's like a wedding ring or something important. That's a will does that. And oftentimes guardianship language is drafted inside the will, or sometimes it can be a separate document outside the will. So that's how those 3 get done. The trust, will, and guardianship. Guardianship and will are oftentimes together. Mm-hmm. Okay. The other 2 are more for when you don't die. Mm-hmm. And this is a power of attorney document and healthcare directives. So a power of attorney document helps organize your finances. If you can't take care of them, it brings someone else into the picture that can. And I actually have more stories of problems with people not having a power of attorney document than I do with people not having a trust. Because at that point, with a trust, there are processes. I mean, we can go through probate. It's not the end of the world. But a power of attorney, without a power of attorney, sometimes we're going for years and years of an asset being completely untouchable. No withdrawals can happen. No communication about that account can happen because the family didn't get a power of attorney document set up, and they're unwilling at this point to make the parent go talk to a doctor and be proven incompetent to handle their assets. That they're just not willing to go there. And so without that, we can't get a power of attorney because they can't sign a document authorizing it because they're not in a good mental state for that. So it's a little bit of a tricky situation there. Yeah. So power of attorney is that. Healthcare directives are what do you want if you are in a state where you can't respond? How much life-saving effort should be put into saving you? Those types of things. So those are different. All this stuff is state specific.
Yeah.
And you have people all over. But that's a foundational estate plan. That should be together in one place, easy to find, and the people that you love know where it is.
And I want to reiterate what you have kind of said on this, is that if this applies to a lot of people, if you have a home, this applies. So this is, again, what I went through with my mom recently, and she was not a wealthy individual. She had her home, and then she had her 401k from her work. And just with those two items, she had a life insurance policy as well. But going through how to handle the home, going through how to handle funeral arrangements, the financial power of attorney, at least making decisions because she was incapacitated for the end there, and then going through that healthcare directive as well. They saved a lot of arguments between myself and my spouses.
Oh, so
not my spouses.
How many spouses do we have, Eric?
We are in Utah.
So, okay,
Siblings.
so
My
hold on,
siblings.
let me ask this. So this was your grandma or your mom?
My mom.
Okay, so your mom she had the foundational estate plan in
She
place?
did. Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yeah. But before she had done that, there were some mistakes that she had made. So, for example, on her house, she had put my sister as on the deed for the house.
An actual owner on the house.
On the owner on the house. And so we caught that and we're like, hey, there are problems to doing that for my sister. When my mom
and for
passed
all
away.
of the rest of you, people don't know this, but there's an opportunity in most cases where if she bought the home for $100,000 and it's worth $500,000, you can erase the taxability of that gain if all the owners pass away.
Right.
And so if your sister's still on it after mom passes away, then there's a big tax bill to pay.
Yeah.
So yeah, that step up in basis is what it's called.
Because you talked about with the home, it's going to go through probate if you die. And I was like, well, if there's another owner on that home, there's ways around that, but it's a negative to that of
to the tax situation. So the proper way of handling that would be have a trust own it. And then if she passes away, the successor trustee steps in place so that we don't have to go through probate. And we also get to do the step up in basis.
Right.
So yeah, and it sounds like you guys did that. I'm mostly talking to the viewers.
Totally. And with the foundational estate plan, this is where it's crazy. And states, it depends on states, but you look at the cost of doing an estate plan. I guess the point I'm saying is that you don't need a massive estate to do it, which you have mentioned, but also the cost of doing that. There's such a wide range of how much this could cost an individual. Yeah. That's why I'm excited, and you've met Jim, and that partnership is an extremely reasonable cost to get this all done,
right?
And just figure it out, and it's
right.
over.
I mean, I used to think anything below $1,500 for the foundational estate plan was cheap, and I think it still is actually pretty cheap.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of really great tools and resources out there where people can get it done for less than that. And there are situations where you should be willing and okay to pay a little more than that. So if you have multiple marriages, kids from different families, complex like business assets, real estate assets, where it's not quite so simple because someone needs to be able to live in a property for a long time until they pass away, and then it goes to other people. And anyway, there's a lot there that could result in a multiple of thousands of dollars for that type of estate plan. And there's also an opportunity to talk to a financial advisor who gets what it's like to actually dissolve an estate or like execute an estate like that, or good estate planners that do that. Because in some cases, we can look at it and say, hold on. Like I know one specific example where it's a second marriage and it's fairly complicated relationship between current wife and the previous kids. And if he passes away, he's the glue in this situation, and it's not going to go well. It wasn't going to go well with the estate plan because the wife and the kids would have had to have worked with each other for a long time if he passed away. So he ended up simplifying the whole thing by creating a life insurance policy that would go to her, and then a bunch of the assets go directly to him, and they all can part ways at that point. Instead of having like the assets go into trust, pay her income while she's alive, and then after she dies, the rest goes to the kids. That's a weird situation to be like, when is dad's old wife gonna die? It's just weird, right?
Yeah.
So there are ways of getting a little bit more creative and simplifying it to make it so that your foundational estate plan is even more executable, I guess. I don't know if that's a word, but
Makes
okay.
sense.
So that was all task one though, and you just knock this out. You get the foundational plan done. The hard part about this is getting on the same page with your spouse, because if you thought that your in-laws were crazy, you wait until you talk about who's going to take care of the kids.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden the conversation, I joke a little bit, but
But we've seen it so many times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically you guys have to decide who's going to be the guardians of your children, who's going to be in charge of the money for them. And it's complicated. Anyway, so that's something for you to talk about. It doesn't need to be hard. The good, simple foundational estate planning can actually be pretty easy. And when you make a foundational estate plan, you can change it. So you don't have to commit like, oh, we said that this person would be our trustee. Maybe their life might have taken a turn for the worse.
Or they may have passed away.
There's something like that happens. You can change it easily.
Yeah.
Okay. So task 2. So there's a moment here where you get this binder or you get this document and you think, I did it. I'm done. This is amazing. You're not close to done. So you just got started with regard to estate planning, but it feels very final and it feels good, especially because those estate plans usually look pretty. So the next 2 steps are getting this document to actually work for you and be effective for you. Step 2 in this process, so task 2 in project 4 of deciding who's in charge, is to create a net worth statement. Now, a lot of financial advisors and professionals will tell you should have done that way back in step 3 or 2 or project 3 and 2. I'm more just like, let's just make progress first. Let's just get out of danger and start to take advantage of what we can and save enough. And then now we get to breathe. Let's actually take inventory of all your assets and debts and look at the whole thing. So that's task 2. And then task 3 is to assign the right instructions for each asset. So the right instructions could be, this is beneficiary and ownership instructions. So you mentioned earlier life insurance, that your mother had life insurance. Mm-hmm. That's an account or asset that's called a contract account where they can just put a beneficiary on it. You don't need a trust. You don't need anything complicated. Naming individuals, it'll just go right to them. Be really easy. If it's not a contract account, then you need the trust to help organize that. And even sometimes when it is a contract account, it's important to throw the trust on there because the trust may have restrictions and rules around when kids get money and under what circumstances they get money. Yeah. Beneficiary designations just flow right through. And the custodian, the big custodians, Schwab, Fidelity, Vanguard, they're not going to be like, is that kid responsible enough for that money? Mm-hmm. They're just sending it. They don't know your kid.
Yeah.
And your trust could have language in there that is the guardian of that.
Well, and Jim brought it up on his podcast as well, or his episode of, let's say that I name a beneficiary on a life insurance policy, beneficiary passes away before me, and then I pass. It's kind of in this weird little limbo area. And so that trust coming into that aspect is nice.
Yeah, especially if you can put the trust on in multiple places. And then when you update the instructions, you just have to update the trust language. Mm-hmm. And then it just keeps that rolling for you.
Yeah.
I do want to throw out the caution really quick on this one that a trust as a beneficiary of an IRA is not always the right thing to do. In fact, most of the people we run into choose not to put the trust on as an IRA beneficiary. It can force withdrawals out quicker. That is a really complicated one to talk about, probably too much for this session, but you might have to take all the money out in 5 years instead of 10 years or your lifetime if you're a spouse. So there's different rules there.
Cool.
There was one thing we talked about, net worth statements. The best way to do this, there's so many tools out there. I mean, you can go Excel, you can find tools out there.
What should I include in it?
So you should include everything you can possibly think that you own. And up
this
above,
book.
Exactly. That plant. You should include everything. I think this is relative depending on how much money you have, but anything over, $5,000 or $10,000 for sure. I'd even throw your cars in there, and the debt on the cars should be on the debt side of that. Mm-hmm. If you have $10 to $100 million in assets, you might not include those in the net worth. But the purpose of the net worth statement is to make it easy on anybody who is there that needs to clean up your financial situation after you pass. So anything that they should, like a car is a great example. Like it would be rough to be settling your parents' estate and be like, oh my gosh, I forgot about the car they have on that inside the garage at that second house. Mm-hmm. That would be nice to at least know that it's out there, that you needed to go work on selling it or getting rid of it or something like that.
Yeah.
So anything above, 10 for sure, above a couple thousand probably. And then you have, I like to put it in categories of things like retirement, business ownership, real estate, and physical assets, direct investments in funds or different things like that aren't within like a custodian. And then I have a debt section, just one section for like a mortgage or car loan. And hopefully that section, the reason you only hope to have one is because you hope that only has a couple lines at most, the debt section, and that everything else has a bunch of lines with assets and values.
I went through this exercise a little bit ago, and I didn't know, do I do term life insurance? Because it's not really there unless I die. So is that going on this? Because how do I assign a value to it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I usually do not include it's called the face value of life insurance on a net worth statement. Okay. You do include the cash value of a life insurance. So some life insurance is permanent life insurance and has an actual value to it, like an investment component to it. I don't have any of that, full disclosure. I just have term. But if you did have that, you would include the cash value, but not the face value. Okay. Now, as a really nice thing to do for your benefit, I have a folder at my house that says, open me if I die, if Zacc's dead, like something like that. I can't remember what I wrote on it, something like that. And in that folder, it has I always take the most recent statement from the life insurance policy and drop it in there too. Okay. So they should be able to take the binder of my estate plan, and I have this net worth page. I print one off. I have my net worth statement, and then like life insurance policies in there too.
Awesome. Is there anything else that we're missing on project 4, deciding who's in charge?
No, task 3 is important. That's the most important. You've done all the work, but you've got to get across the finish line of actually applying the estate plan to the assets, updating beneficiaries. Those are the most horrific stories in our world, is when people pass without the right instructions on accounts.